The Falcons will lose a 5th-round pick next year for tampering with Kirk Cousins. Did they get hit too hard, or did they get off with a slap on the wrist?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. Sirius Black, a.k.a. the Jolly Green Giant, a.k.a. the Iron that Sharpens the Iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And, of course, I've been covering the Falcons for 18 years, an entire lifetime of one of your adult lifetimes. One of you guys just turned 18 in the last few months or weeks. And just think, I've been doing this for as long as you've been living. And I used to do it at falcfans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I think each and every one of you, including the 18-year-olds out there, and some of you that are younger than 18 or older than 18-year-olds, as long as you're an everydayer, you're close to my heart, right? All you got to do is become an everydayer, is listen to this show as your first listen or first watch of the day. And all you got to do to become an everyday or subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we're talking about the Robinson brothers, Zac and Bijan, and their fits within the run game. But first, we got to talk about the league finally, after months and weeks of speculation of what will happen with the Falcons when in regards to their tampering penalty with Kirk Cousins. You know, how severe would it be? You know, we finally got that answer on Thursday morning. I'm just happy that the league didn't wait till like Friday afternoon to do it. And I'm like, God, I got to do an emergency pod now while I'm sitting here chilling. But they obliged and did it Thursday morning. Falcons are going to lose a 2025 5th-round draft pick for tampering with not only Kirk Cousins, but the league's founding also saw that they tampered with Darnell Mooney and Charlie Warner. Their tampering, their relatively light punishment was due to what was deemed by the NFL as administrative/logistical tampering. According to NFL Network, where they were contacting players basically after they had agreed to terms during the quote-unquote legal tampering period about like travel plans and whatnot. And Kirk basically admitted to this in his opening presser when he talked about how after he agreed with the terms of the contract, like he contacted the Falcons PR people and training staff and whatnot. And, you know, I got some messages from some Locked On Falcons insiders this morning when the news broke that that it was worth it, that the Falcons only lost a 5th, because I think those people were believing that without tampering, they wouldn't have landed Kirk Cousins. That's not really what happened here, right? That the way that the NFL rules basically make it so that teams are allowed to contact a player's agent during the quote-unquote legal tampering period that began on March 11th this year, that lasts 52 hours before the league year actually started on, March 13th at 4 p.m. Eastern time. Now, during that 52-hour window, you are not allowed as a team employee, janitors, GMs, etc. You're not allowed to contact the player. You can only contact his representation. What the Falcons did is they didn't contact the player before. They contacted Kirk and Darnell and Charlie's representation when they needed to, but upon agreeing to terms, what the league found was that they then got in contact with the players after that point about some of these logistical issues. So basically, someone either made a phone call or sent a text that they shouldn't have sent in the building, or they received a phone call or a text that they shouldn't have gotten, and they responded to it, is basically what happened after they agreed to terms. So it wasn't like the Falcons are giving up a 5th to land Kirk. They had landed Kirk. They didn't need to give up the 5th to tamper with Kirk, is basically the point I'm trying to say. So I think the Falcons got off pretty light on this one. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But in addition to losing that 5th-round pick, they also got fined $250,000. So Arthur Blank's going to have to pay that fine, and Terry Fontenot is going to have to pay a $50,000 fine. Now, the Chiefs got hit by more fines. I think the head coach, Andy Reid, got fined back in 2016 because we thought, okay, the precedent on this is a 3rd-round pick. The Chiefs lost a 3rd in 2016, a 6th, I think, in 2017, and then were hit with heavy fines, I think over $1 million in fines collectively for their tampering for Jeremy Maclin almost a decade ago. And we spent the last several months speculating that, when it comes to Roger Goodell over the last, 20 years that he's been the NFL commissioner, no one ever walks away from these punishments feeling like they got off lightly or that it was a fair punishment. And for me, this is like the first time ever where I'm like, oh, the Falcons got off pretty light on this one. But then again, there were people back in March being like, oh, the Falcons should only lose a 6th or 7th round pick. And I've also seen people today being like, based off of the type of tampering, air quotes, the Falcons were doing, these logistic, maybe they shouldn't have been punished at all, right? This is the type of tampering that doesn't matter. Once a player agrees to terms, why can't he contact the team to arrange travel stuff and to talk about, when he can take his physical and all this stuff. And, so technically, I guess to those people, then the Falcons did get punished more than I thought. So, still, I guess technically we're right on that. So it's all technicalities. But, we talked about this, what 10 days ago when Adam Schefter first talked about it being, coming this week. And we talked about how it could be a good thing that the Falcons could get hit with losing a 3rd or 4th round pick, because maybe it will change how they approach the draft and prompt them to be less aggressive trading up on day 2 as they have done the last 3 years and be more likely to trade back on day 2. And I argued then, and will continue to argue today, that that strategy to me has been more fruitful than right when they traded back in 2021 in the 2nd round. They picked up a 4th that turned out to be Drew Dalman. You can argue, as I did a couple of days ago, that Drew Dalman is the most successful non-first round pick of the Terry Fontenot draft era through 4 years so far. We'll see if we have to change the math on that 6 months from now. But and you compare that to the guys that they traded up to: Arnold Ebiketie, Matthew Bergeron, Brook Ororo. Again, I know a lot of people are very high on all 3 of those guys. So but to me, it hasn't quite worked out in the ways that you would want it to make those trade ups worthwhile. And so that was, to me, the potential positive spin of this. But only losing a 5th round pick, that's not going to probably change how the Falcons approach the draft. And I think the positive spin is that you only lost a 5th round pick. That's basically in most drafts a special teams player, a good special teams player, but a depth guy and a special teams guy. So not a huge hit for the Atlanta Falcons. So we can happily put this behind us and move forward. And speaking of moving forward, that's what offensive linemen prefer to do. And so let's talk about the run game or the potential lack thereof, because we heard from this past week Drake London saying that the Falcons are going to put the ball in the air a lot more as a change from last year's offense. And basically, are we buying that statement? And now I personally am selling that statement. I'll explain why. And it will allow us to sort of explore what Zac Robinson, the new Falcons offensive coordinator's impact is going to be on the run game and the offensive line in general as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Passion, drive, and patience. It is the winning formula for winning championships, and it's also the winning formula that's going to keep your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need for your vehicle to maintain it and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and so much more. And it doesn't matter if you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, you're guaranteed. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money it comes back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash, baby. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car an MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. So as we continue today's Locked On Falcons, I want to plug the free 24/7 streaming sports channel, Locked On Sports Today, program for you every day to bring you the best stories, can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. And if you're looking for more local big stories, check out Locked On Sports Atlanta on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So we got a notable soundbite this past week from Drake London as we end up with OTAs. He talked, and someone basically asked him what's one of the biggest changes from last year's offense to this year's offense, and he said, we're going to put the ball in the air more. And I don't want to sit here and say Drake is a liar, right? This is the perfect time to play the Soulja Boy soundbite, but I'm not allowed to play that anymore, But I just want to hit that button. Anyway, sorry. I'm not going to read too much into what Drake is saying, right? I do think the Falcons will throw the ball more. But I don't think we're going to transform into this pass-heavy offense. I don't think the Falcons are really built to do that. Kirk is coming from arguably the most happy offense in the NFL the last 2 years. He was leading the NFL in pass attempts, up until the point he got injured last year. He finished top 3 in that category in 2022. But despite being top 3 in 2022, the Vikings, despite having Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson sort of carrying their passing attack, they figured that they needed more firepower, and that's why they used the first round pick on Jordan Addison in 2023. And that's why I say the Falcons aren't really built for that, because if Jefferson and Hawkinson weren't enough for the Vikings, I don't think London and Pitts are going to be enough for the Falcons, right? Not to mention the offensive line that the Falcons have isn't really built to be, heavily invested in this drop back passing game. They're built to be more of a run blocking unit than a straight drop back passing game. And we watched Arthur Smith lean heavily on the play action passing game to minimize how much of that straight drop back passing game that this team was going to get in, because he knew his offensive line wasn't built to play that way. And it's going to be fascinating to sort of see where Zac Robinson fits on this sort of spectrum, especially when you compare him to recent Falcons offensive coordinators, because I felt like with some of the guys that we've had the last couple of years, looking at Kyle Shanahan, Arthur Smith, and Steve Sarkisian mainly, I thought like certain elements that you would dial up that were good things, you would there was a compensation, right? For example, right? Like with Kyle Shanahan's 2016 offense, the Falcons were really good at designing explosive plays that year, right? That's why they were the most explosive offense in the NFL that year. But I think at the same time, it came at the expense of taking a lot more negative plays up front, sacks, a lot more tackles for loss. And then when Sark came in the next year, the Falcons were able to minimize the sacks and the tackles for loss, because I thought Sark did a better job, scheming up the protections, but he also was worse at designing the explosive plays. And Arthur Smith was in a similar mold where, he did a great job masking the offensive line's issues with his play calling, the play action, all that stuff. But obviously the lack of explosiveness in the design of his offense was very apparent these last 3 years. And we're kind of hoping that Zac Robinson can be the perfect balance of both, like be able to scheme up plays on a level comparable to Kyle Shanahan, close to it, as close as you can possibly get, who's arguably the best in the league at that. So we're not expecting Zac Robinson to immediately be the best in the league, but we won't complain about him if he is. So hopefully he can get close to Kyle Shanahan in that regard, be better than Smith and Sark. He needs to be if this team is going to be successful in the next couple of years. And also not do so at the expense of the offensive line, and be able to protect the offensive line and be able to lean on the play action passing game, be able to scheme up those protections so that we don't get those negative plays up front that were too often the case in previous years and even last year. And one of the other things I'm curious about Robinson and his play calling is going to be, can he utilize the passing game, especially the short passing game, to kind of complement the run game? Because that was something we talked about briefly last year when the run game was kind of stagnant during the middle of the season. It's basically the idea that on a 1st and 10, the goal is to get 4 or 5 yards to keep your offense on schedule. And it really doesn't matter that much whether you get it running the football or throwing the football, right? Now, defenses tend to treat you differently. Like if you can consistently get it on the ground, they're going to play you differently than if you can get that through the air. But, in the end of the day, your offense still remains on schedule, whether you run a 4-yard pass or a 4-yard run, right? And so the Falcons last year weren't really built to thrive in that short passing game without the run game being there. And that was a big part of why this offense struggled so much and was so inconsistent. They should be better at that this year, in addition to not only hopefully the run game bouncing back, but you should also be able to better supplement that run game in the weeks where it is struggling. Because again, that's one of the things we've talked about, going into this opening month of the season, where you're going to face, some really good run defenses. And, can you, Steelers, Chiefs, etc. Well, Chiefs aren't great at run defense, but, theoretically they should be, is what I'll say. But the challenge is going to be, can Zac Robinson complement that? And you have the upgraded quarterback, so you should have a quarterback that's much better at the quick game, and Kirk is. And you also have receivers that I think are probably better suited for separating on some of the underneath stuff, right? Darnell Mooney, Rondale Moore. I think that's really what their games are really built upon, right? Everybody talks about the speed that the Falcons have had at the wide receiver room. And I think the perception always when you hear speed is like, oh, that's going to stretch defenses vertically. I don't think Mooney and Moore are really going to do a whole lot of that this year. They're going to try, but I don't think that's really what they're effective at doing. What they're really more effective at is stretching defenses horizontally, so to speak. So winning underneath and being able to turn, some of these drag routes into big gains. And that will be interesting to sort of see where Zac Robinson falls on that spectrum, if he can sort of dial that up. He should be. Again, he has the personnel to do it more so than what Arthur Smith has had these last couple of years. Yeah, that was a real big issue with Mariota. Less with Ritter, but still, they didn't really have the type of talent, I think, at the receiver position to really take it further than where they got it last year. But all that to say, I do think we will throw the ball more, but I do think the run game is going to be a key component of the offense. They're essentially going to be a balanced attack, and not balanced in the way that it's often used, which in the passing league is basically like, oh, balanced is being, balanced in today's NFL is like throwing the ball 55% of the time and running the ball 45% of the time, not 50-50 like people. If you're 50-50, you're actually a run heavy team in today's and the way that most teams play nowadays. So we'll be balanced in the strict sense of 55-45 past the run, as opposed to last year when the goal was to be probably closer to 45-55 when it came to pass versus run. That was the goal. We didn't quite achieve that for obvious reasons. So we'll see exactly how balanced they are, right? And we'll see sort of what Bijan's role is going to be, right? Again, in this balanced offense, he'll still be a featured weapon of this offense. And we heard him compare his potential usage this year to Christian McCaffrey this past week. And we also heard Raheem Morris say that, his goal is to get Bijan the ball as much as possible. And how should we interpret those statements from both of those guys? And we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So when Bijan Robinson compares his potential usage to Christian McCaffrey, and Raheem Morris is talking about getting him the ball as many times as they possibly can, this is music to the ears of every fantasy football person, on the entire planet. Although, again, I'm a little skeptical because I'm not sure it's as meaningful to read from it in terms of reality football, right? And it's sort of initially Bijan mentioning Christian McCaffrey, I'm just like, okay, maybe he's referring to how he's aligned. And then I looked at the numbers and basically, thinking that, McCaffrey gets a lot of his targets out of the backfield. And we saw certainly a significant percentage of that from Bijan last year, but we also saw the team try to line them up wide in the slot. And then I looked up the numbers last year for the 49ers, and basically where Bijan and Christian McCaffrey aligned were basically virtually identical, minus, give or take a handful of snaps here or there in terms of being split out wide and being moved into the slot, and how many of their routes are run from the backfield and whatnot. It's pretty much the same number, or percentages, I should say. And then I was thinking, okay, well, maybe, that'll be more or less screens or something, because McCaffrey gets more or less screens than Bijan does or something like that. And then I looked it up, and again, it's pretty much the same. So I don't know if there's that much of a difference in how Bijan was used and McCaffrey was used. It was just clearly the difference was the actual execution of that usage, right? More so than anything else. And so to me, it's probably less about how, where they align and sort of how they're used. It's just kind of the routes that they're asked to run. Maybe that's the difference. And again, without doing a deep dive into, Bijan's route tree or Christian McCaffrey's route tree, I can't tell you what those differences are. Now, when you get into Raheem's comments, so I say all that to basically be like, Bijan's comparing himself to Christian McCaffrey. Like, cool, yeah, compare yourself to the best running back in the NFL, the highest paid running back. Yeah, you should strive to be like that, right? So like, to me, it's kind of a nothing burger of a statement until we get something a little bit more concrete about what specific aspects of McCaffrey that are going to be different from Bijan. That's kind of the point I'm trying to make. So when we get to Raheem Morris's comments, again, people are going to run wild with that because there's a very, 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 and I cannot stress how many varies, false perception. It's probably the falsest perception in the history of mankind, if I can say so myself, that the Falcons did a poor job utilizing Bijan last year, right? We talked about it a bunch, especially after the week after that Vikings game, where the whole planet seemed to freak out about, Bijan being off the field for 2 snaps, inside the 5-yard line, and the Falcons designing up a jet sweep to Jonnu Smith. And it's like, oh my God, we need to fire Arthur Smith immediately. And that game came on the heels of the Titans game, where they designed up a pass to Jonnu Smith and Michael Brewer. For, frankly, I didn't have a problem with that play call. The jet sweep to Jonnu, I did have a problem with that. But again, we don't get bent out of shape about a handful of play calls. And this is something if you're new to the pod, if you weren't listening to the pod throughout last season, if you weren't every day or last year, you won't know this, but I'm just going to give you a heads up. Like, we don't get bent out of shape here on Locked On Falcons about one or two bad play calls, right? Basically, the way I've explained it in the past is, in a typical NFL game, there's 63 plays in a game. Even if 5 of those were questionable to bad play calls, that's still a 92% hit rate in terms of good play calls or non-bad play calls, I guess you would say. 92%, at least when I was still in school. And again, maybe the rules have changed in the last 20 years since I've been in school. But when I was in school, a 92 was an A, right? So I sit there and I go, like, even if you feel like there were 5 bad play calls in a game, like, that's still an A passing grade in regards to that. And, what's funnily enough is, like, I can't remember if it was specifically this game, but I want to say it was that first Saints game after the bye week, that I think that was the game that Arthur Smith probably had the worst play calling of the season, but no one complained about play calling that week because the Falcons won. Because, again, play calling only becomes a problem when the Falcons lose. It becomes, a non-issue when the Falcons win. Like, that's just how it works. And people gripe about 1 or 2 bad play calls when they lose, and then when they win, they don't care about 5 bad play calls or whatever it is. But I think there were 2 games where you could legitimately gripe about Bijan's usage. That first Bucs game that he missed mostly due to a migraine. So there were reasons why he didn't play that game. Whether you agree with those reasons is whatever. And then the second, I think it was the second Panthers game, where the Falcons ran the ball a bunch early in that game, and for some reason it was mostly Tyler Algier and Cordero Patterson, and Bijan was kind of the third wheel at least on early downs. And so that was questionable to me. But outside of that, like, the rest of it was a non-issue, right? And when people sort of have this notion of, like, hey, if you just feed Bijan the football, this offense is going to automatically prosper. And it's like, that's not true, because we all watched the Arizona Cardinals game, and Bijan played great that week, but nothing else about the Falcons offense worked, right? And so, like, that's why, while I expect to see more of Bijan this year, and I expect the offense to be better this year, I don't think those two things are, like, directly related to one another, right? I expect we'll see still a decent workload for Tyler Algier. Last year he averaged about 12 touches a game. This year I'm expecting that number to kind of, drop by a third or so, get down to like 8 or so touches a game, factoring in both runs and passes. And Bijan will probably get, 18 touches a game, right? And so there will be weeks where Bijan gets 18 touches and Algier only gets 4. And then the next week Bijan will get 18 touches and Algier will get 14. And, that's where the averages will sort of come. And depending on how that breaks down will depend a lot on context and circumstances. And that's something that some, I won't say a lot, some fantasy folks tend to ignore. The people that cover fantasy sports here on Locked On, are all about context. Many of the guests that you'll see me have on the podcast in July and August talking about fantasy also understand and value context there. But there's a lot of people out there that don't value those things in the world. And unfortunately, they tend to be the loudest people. And the reason why I'm bent out of shape about it, while rather than talking about Bijan, I'm just airing my grievances, guys, is because, like, last year in July and August, we did multiple episodes devoted to, hey, Bijan is probably not going to live up to the fantasy hype this year, right? That, this narrative that Bijan, like, he was being a top 3 draft pick. And basically I said he'll be a borderline top 10 running back in fantasy. So he's going to underachieve your expectations. He wound up being like RB12 or something like that. So again, close to being right. And I think what happened was last year, people were like, Arthur Smith, Bijan's going to get utilized like Derrick Henry. And we sat here on this podcast and we said, if you've been paying attention to the Falcons offense in Atlanta and not just focusing on what Arthur Smith's offense was 3 years ago in Tennessee, if you've been paying attention in Atlanta, he's run 2 or 3 headed backfields, and that's going to continue in 2023 with Bijan, with Algier, with CP, right? And what happened was people were wrong about that, right? Thinking that Bijan was going to get the lion's share of all the touches. And rather than going, oh, my bad, I miscalculated, they were like, no, it's not my bad. It's Arthur Smith's bad. He's bad. Fire him. Get rid of him. He's terrible. And, you see similar things, what happens with draft evaluations, where a player where a fan or somebody will overhype a draft pick, and then they'll find someone to blame, the player, the coach, or whatever, when it's just like, no, you were just wrong on the player. It's fine. Like, but it is what it is. But, getting back to the topic at hand, I'm done with airing my grievances. Uh, I expect Bijan we'll probably see over 300 touches for him this year. How that is split from run to pass is going to depend heavily on the season goes, right? If the Falcons are winning a bunch of games, they have a bunch of leads, probably a higher percentage of that 300 plus touches is going to be run plays. If not, then, we'll probably see a higher percentage of those be pass plays moving forward. So that will be the thing. I think Algier will still have a role in this offense, but probably not as big a role as he had under Arthur Smith. I don't think we'll see much of Jace McClellan this year unless things go horribly wrong and injuries or suspensions or something derails Bijan and Algier and leaves them out of the lineup for an extended period of time. And if you want to get my thoughts on Jace McClellan, we're probably weeks away from that here on the pod, but if you're a Locked On Falcons insider, you just got a video breakdown of that today on Thursday. To become a Locked On Falcons insider, just join the link in the description below. You get a 14-day free trial. Then it's $4.99 a month after that point. And if you sign up today, you'll probably get free versions of the last 2 draft picks in Casey Washington and Zion Logue, which should be done by the time we get to the end of June. And that will be free. And then you can decide to keep paying. And after that point, you'll basically probably be paying, if everything goes according to plan. Once we get to July, we'll be focusing more on pro film than college film, looking at Minnesota, looking at the Rams, and sort of seeing what things that we can sort of steal from Kevin O'Connell and Sean McVay's playbook or Raheem Morris's defensive playbook and port over here to Atlanta. And you guys can join me on my journey as I try to figure out, what's the difference between inside zone and duo run plays? Because that is, to me, what I struggle with. Like, I think every time I think I'm getting a handle on this. Like, no, I don't know what this play is. So you can follow along on that journey as a Locked On Falcons insider at the link in the description below. Not only do you get that, you get your one-on-one feedback with me, telling me why you love or hate the tampering penalties, whatever you want. You can provide that. Next week on the pod, we'll be back with more Falcons historian shootout. I will be participating against Charles McDonald, talking about Michael Turner later in the week, and we're still trying to figure out the schedule for that second matchup. That will be a first round matchup, so we'll see about that. But we'll also, now that we're entering that long period of time between now and training camp, it's time to sort of look ahead to the roster, and we'll probably do a 53-man roster breakdown. Eventually we should be able to get a Brandon Dorless breakdown on the pod, like 3 weeks later. And what's the other thing that's in store? Someone asked me a question about something, and I was like, someone asked me a question about, some of my draft misses. So that may be a topic worth discussing. I've already mentioned before how Foye Oluokun is kind of my biggest miss over the last 6 years. But that's, worth maybe a full episode or something like that. So those are some of the things that are potentially in store for you next week. So continue to make us your first listen. All you got to do is subscribe and follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Of course, your second listen can be Locked On Sports Today, Locked On Sports Atlanta. Check out Locked On Hawks. Draft is slowly inching up. We're about 2 weeks away from the NBA draft to see who the Hawks take number 1. Check out Brad Rowland on Locked On Hawks. Check out Locked On Bulldogs. Locked On Braves. I know it's not a great time with the Braves right now, but they'll figure it out. So go check them out. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, guys. Your team every day.